The 2020 Democratic presidential primary field continued to fill up this week. Former Vice President Joe Biden's entrance into the race was just one of several political stories this week, bringing us, as always, to the analysis of Shields and Brooks. That's syndicated columnist Mark Shields and New York Times columnist David Brooks. Hello to both of you. It's Friday. So let's talk about Joe Biden. He finally is in the race, David. And it was interesting, his message, the launch video message yesterday, contrasting himself with President Trump and Charlottesville, and a president who would condone the kind of violence in Charlottesville. What did you make of that?
I thought it was a smart strategy. First, if you're a Democrat and you think all we have to do is nominate someone normal and not screw this up, we can beat Trump. And Joe Biden is normal. And the country knows him. He's been through it all before. So him versus Trump, if you just want to beat Trump, he's probably your safest bet. That's a pretty good argument. Second, I actually like the way he made this about values. I mean, there are a lot of other things that are going to go on this campaign, but what America stands for and what our values are is a central one. And he really made it about that. And then he really wrapped himself around the Constitution, the American founding, and said this is not who we are. And so if you're worried the Democrats sort of don't like the founding documents or something like that, then he said, no, we're American, we like these documents, we just want to live up to them. The one risky thing in that announcement was the emphasis on restoration, that we're going to restore what we had. And there is a very forward focus in the electorate right now, so that one I think might have been a little off.
What about that, Mark, and the stark choice that he seemed to put forward?
I think it's the best way for Joe Biden to run. I think that he made it a Biden not against the rest of the field, but a Biden against Trump. There was almost implicit in it a campaign I didn't cover, but should have, and that was the 1920 campaign of Warren Harding, return to normalcy. There was almost a sense that we've been in the abnormal, let's become normal. And I think Joe Biden, the organizing premise of the campaign, is a line that Joe Biden himself used in defense of Barack Obama when Obama was being criticized by Democrats for not having lived up to his mission and his mandate in the first term. And he said, compare him not to the Almighty, compare him to the alternative. And that's what he's asking. Compare me to the alternative, Donald Trump. And I think that makes sense for Joe Biden's candidacy, and there's a logic to it.
So he got some good news to start out with. First 24 hours, I think we reported he raised $6.3 million. It's a little bit more than Beto O'Rourke and Bernie Sanders raised. But he's also run into some headwinds. He went on this television show on ABC this morning, very popular show called The View, and they asked him about the issues you would expect, the Anita Hill hearings, where she still holds him accountable for what happened, and most recently, the women who accused Joe Biden of being too familiar, touching them when they didn't ask to be touched. Right. I want to just quickly show an excerpt of what he had to say when they talked about it.
I'm really sorry if what I did in talking to them, trying to console, that in fact they took it a different way. And it's my responsibility to make sure that I bend over backwards to try to understand how not to do that.
Nancy Pelosi wants you to say, I'm sorry that I invaded your space.
Sorry I invaded your space. I mean, I'm sorry this happened. Yeah. But I'm not sorry in the sense that I think I did anything that was intentionally designed to do anything wrong or be inappropriate.
So, David, that wasn't good enough for some of the women this morning. And then the reaction on social media, women were saying, wait a minute, he should have just directly apologized.
He could have, yeah, but I think he wanted to say this was not a sexual thing, and I totally agree with that. Joe Biden's invaded my space plenty of time. That's just the way Joe Biden is. And when it's across genders, then it becomes a more sensitive subject, obviously. And so his answer, I think, was the right one. He's just an ebullient kind of guy who is, who grabs you. But I think he's aware that this is not the way things are done now in an era where we're much more sensitive about sexual harassment. He just can't behave that way. And so the not good intent, but combined with I've learned the new situation, I think that's a reasonably fair option. There's one thing I've been thinking about with Biden over the last 24 hours, is that if you looked at Twitter, you would think nobody supports Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. And yet he's number one in the fundraising. And you've got this weird phenomenon where the Republican elites are kind of moderate. They'd be happy with Mitt Romney. But the grassroots are radicalized. On the Democratic side, the elites are kind of radicalized, but the grassroots are a little more moderate. And so you've got these two different situations in the two parties.
So how is he navigating this, Mark? And could it be a problem with women voters?
I guess it could be, Judy. I'd say this, that 46 years in Washington, a city that lives by innuendo and thrives on rumors, none about Joe Biden. I mean, Joe Biden has lived an exemplary life in terms of straying from marital values or anything of the sort. I think it's important to emphasize that. I think what he fails to do in his answer is to come up, quite frankly, with a disciplined answer, which ought to be 3 sentences, and it ought to be 1 paragraph, and he shouldn't deviate from it. Just as an example, not bookend, George W. Bush, when he was about to run for president in 2000, faced charges about his own misspent youth all the way up to the age of 40. And he had a simple answer every time someone came up. What about the drunk driving? What about this fight you got into? He had a simple answer. When I was young and foolish, I was young and foolish. After a while, reporters got tired of asking. Joe Biden has to, not something quite that glib, but something that times have changed, I have changed. I think there's a big difference between invading someone's space and a hand on the shoulder and Anita Hill. The Anita Hill event has not been handled well by Biden so far.
But you're saying all he needs is a disciplined response.
I think that, and the same one, so that he doesn't deviate from it.
I want to ask about one of the other Democrats this week. Elizabeth Warren got a little bit out front. Bernie Sanders talked a lot about free college in 2016. But Elizabeth Warren this week came up with a plan, David, which in so many words makes college almost free, public college almost free, for students who need help. Does that set her apart in a significant way, or what?
Well, I respect her for she's had a whole series of serious policy proposals which have been thin on the ground for some of the candidates. But this particular one is a very terrible idea. College graduates are among the wealthiest people and the well-off people in our society. We should not be subsidizing college graduates. The top quarter earners hold 50% of the student debt. So if we start forgiving student debt, we're really helping people who are going to be doctors and lawyers. She could have had a plan where you only forgive $10,000 worth of debt, which A, would have been much cheaper, and B, would have helped the people who really need it, those who racked up debt but never got a degree, who are still struggling. And she didn't do that, and maybe she had ideological reasons, but there's an obvious political reason, is that Democratic primary voters are pretty well educated. And this goes right at the core of the Democratic primary electorate, but it seems to me a very foolish plan.
What about it, Mark?
I think there's a couple. I think, first of all, Elizabeth Warren does deserve credit. She's won the ideas primary. I mean, she's been specific. She's been bold. She's laid them out. This is a problem, Judy. Make no mistake about it. College debt today is a bigger debt than is the mortgage debt carried by Americans. It's bigger than auto loans. It is a public policy dilemma and just a time bomb that is really affecting decisions, professional life decisions that people make. In the first 100 years of the California system, the best public educational, higher education system in the world, not a penny was charged for tuition. Now, what happened? In the last 3 decades in this country, the cost of public college education has increased 300%. The cost of private education has increased twice, 200%. And this is an attempt to confront that problem and the consequences of that problem. I don't think it's the total answer, but at least it's dealing with, I think, a very serious public policy question that both parties have essentially avoided.
She's putting a proposal out there, whether it's too much, not enough, but we're talking about it.
Yeah.
Just quickly to the reaction to the Mueller report, David. Still a lot of conversation around it. Democrats aren't moving full-blown ahead with impeachment, but they are picking up. They're asking people to testify. They're calling for documents. The White House reaction, the president's reaction is, no way, we're not giving you anything. Who comes out ahead in this?
I think the Democrats do in this case. We have a long historical precedent that Congress has oversight responsibility for the executive branch. I mean, that's as old as the hills. And if that comes under question, if they can't call an executive branch official to a hearing and ask, how did you do your job? Well, that really does undermine our system. And so I'm not wild about impeachment. But I am earnest about forcing the executive branch to submit to the way we do things in this country, which is to have oversight hearings and to answer calls when members of Congress ask you to come up to Hill and explain yourself. And so I think the Democrats should be pretty forceful on this one.
But Mark, the president, the president himself is saying, we're not giving you anything. We're not giving you tax returns. I'm not going to let you talk to my former White House counsel, Don McGahn, the man
tell
who
you
was
my
in charge
favorite
of
color,
personnel
my favorite movie, nothing. No, stonewalling, Judy. And I think what we have in that stonewalling is Donald Trump really, I think, publicly wrestling with his reaction to the Mueller report. He's gone from alternating being the chest-thumping, triumphant victor, I'm exonerated, no obstruction, no collusion, to I'm the poor, beleaguered victim that these 18 lawyers came after, spending money and time to get me. I'm the victim. And I don't think he's quite got his own footing on this, and obviously his administration doesn't. But I think what he wants to do is play out the clock, it looks like, heading into 2020, that's what he's going to play. Bill Clinton and Ronald Reagan were both elected with minority of the vote, and both of them did in 2 terms what a wise president does. They enlarged the point where 65% of the country approved of their performance after 2 terms. They enlarged. Donald Trump each day narrows his base. And maybe he solidifies it, but it gets narrower and smaller instead of trying to reach out to get a majority. And I think this is an example of it.
But we keep saying this every week, David. I mean, his base loves what he's doing. They love the fact that he's, basically saying no way to the establishment.
It does work for his base, and impeachment would work for the Democratic base. The Democratic partisans are pretty pro-impeachment. A recent Washington Post poll shows that independents are not.
No.
And the majority of Americans do not want to go down the impeachment. They think generally it's a waste of time. Let's focus on the actual issues that we care about. And I'm sure that's where the core of the electorate is. But the Democrats also have a bit of a base problem there.
And so Mark, do the Democrats just keep asking and asking until they're blue in the face?
I think they ought to be. I think they ought to be disciplined in their asking. I think Nancy Pelosi has a problem with that caucus. I mean, the caucus is the loudest and in many regards the most glamorous voices in it come from single party districts. Where they don't have to worry about primaries. And, the voters that David mentions are worried about the cost of prescription drugs. They're worried about medical care. And the Democratic Party better be seen as responding to that and addressing it and not simply pursuing Donald Trump with 5 different committees. But I think it has to be far more disciplined and far more focused than it has been so far.
In a few seconds, we're going to watch this play out.
Yeah, but I hope that at least they take it to court. I think the courts, the legal experts say the Trump administration is in a losing position there.
I agree.
This just firm established, it has to be established that we have 3 branches of government, the Congress and the executive sort of work together, but Congress has that oversight power that has to be protected.
David Brooks, Mark Shields, we thank you.